Episode 08. Why General Meng Tian had to be removed. Fusu was gone. The emperor's eldest son had accepted the edict as the voice of his father. But Meng Tian was still alive. Meng Tian, the northern general who commanded Qin's frontier armies, had not accepted the order so easily. He had questioned it. He had seen the problem. The first emperor was away from the capital. No crown prince had been publicly established. Meng Tian commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the frontier, and Fusu, the emperor's eldest son, had been sent there as supervisor. So why should one messenger arrive with one document and two of the most important men in the empire die without confirmation? That was the question Meng Tian saw. And that was why he became dangerous. Welcome to the Dragon Archive, where Chinese history is told through story, evidence, and the shadows left behind. In the previous episode, we asked why Fusu and Meng Tian did not resist the edict sent to the northern frontier. Fusu, the eldest son of Qin Shi Huang, treated the command as his father's will. But Meng Tian, the general of the northern armies, hesitated. According to the Shiji, when the envoy arrived and opened the letter, Fusu wept and prepared to take his own life. Meng Tian stopped him. He reminded Fusu that the emperor was still away from the capital, that no crown prince had been established, that he himself commanded 300,000 troops on the frontier, and that Fusu served there as supervisor. Then he asked the most dangerous question in the entire succession crisis. How do we know this is not deception? This was not rebellion. Not yet. Meng Tian did not immediately raise an army. He did not declare the edict false. He did not proclaim Fusu emperor. He only asked for verification. But in the Qin imperial system, even that was dangerous. Because the new court did not fear only armies. It feared doubt. And Meng Tian had shown that doubt was still possible. For Zhao Gao, the palace eunuch and official who controlled access to imperial documents and seals, this was a problem that could not be left unresolved. Zhao Gao's power did not come from commanding soldiers. It came from controlling the emperor's voice. He stood near the documents, near the seals, near the channels through which imperial orders became reality. But Meng Tian stood near something different. Soldiers, frontier defenses, the memory of the first emperor's trust, and most importantly, the last surviving question around the forged succession. Was the edict real? A general does not need to rebel to become dangerous. Sometimes it is enough that he remembers what the old order looked like. Meng Tian was dangerous not because he had already acted, but because he had not fully submitted. He had heard the command. He had doubted it. And unlike ordinary officials in the capital, he was surrounded by an army. This was the problem Zhao Gao had to solve. The new succession depended on a fragile illusion. That the dead emperor had truly chosen He, the younger prince, as successor. That the edict sent to Fusu and Meng Tian was the emperor's real command. That the imperial system had continued without interruption. Meng Tian threatened that illusion. Not by making a speech. Not by leading a rebellion. But simply by existing as a man who knew the order could be questioned. According to the Shiji, Fusu finally said to Meng Tian, "If a father orders his son to die, how can he ask again?" Then Fusu killed himself. Meng Tian, however, refused to die. This created a new problem. If Fusu was dead, the possible heir was removed. But Meng Tian remained. A general who had questioned the edict. A commander associated with the northern armies. A senior officer tied to the first emperor's old military order. So the envoy did not defeat Meng Tian on the battlefield. He did something more administrative. He handed Meng Tian over to the authorities. Meng Tian was imprisoned at Yangzhou. This is the key to the story. Meng Tian was not removed by an army. He was removed by procedure. The empire did not need to fight his soldiers directly. It only needed to separate the general from the command structure that gave him power. Once Meng Tian was taken away from the army, the northern military force no longer had a recognized political center. The soldiers still existed. The camps still existed. The defenses still existed. But the man who could connect those armies to Fusu, to the old emperor, and to a possible challenge against the new succession had been cut off. This was how power worked in the Qin system. A man could command hundreds of thousands of troops, but if the center withdrew recognition, if the documents turned against him, if the official channels declared him guilty, then military strength could be isolated before it became political resistance. Meng Tian's tragedy was not that he lacked soldiers. It was that his soldiers belonged to the empire, and the empire's voice had already been captured. For Zhao Gao, this was not enough. Meng Tian was one half of a larger problem. His brother, Meng Yi, was still close to the imperial court. The Meng family had served the first emperor. One brother stood in the north with the army. The other stood nearer to the center of power. Together, they represented something the new regime could not tolerate: continuity with the old order. A new ruler built on a questionable succession cannot feel safe while the old emperor's trusted men remain in place. Because those men do not need to start a rebellion. They only need to remind people that another version of legitimacy once existed. So Zhao Gao's task was not simply to remove General Meng Tian. It was to break the memory of the old chain of authority. The edict had killed Fusu. Procedure had isolated Meng Tian. But the Meng family was not yet finished. And in the next part of the story, Zhao Gao would turn toward the brother who stood closer to the court. Because when a regime is born through controlled information, every witness becomes a threat. And every old loyalist becomes a question that must be silenced.
Thanks for watching The Dragon Archive. Every story here begins in the shadows, but returns to the records. If you want more stories from Chinese history, emperors, rebels, assassins, philosophers, and forgotten kingdoms, follow the archive. The past is not gone. It is waiting to be read again.